inspired, fired up, and on the move. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the places and all the races, arm in arm now, upon our feet. Yeah, 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 yeah. From all the schools and all the homes, it's time to take it. It's time to take it to the street.
Gonna get militant up in here. Here we are once again with you, our friends, on this week's episode of The Call, the program that calls you to action, that calls you to advocacy, that calls you to do education, to calls you to do anything that can help us have better communities and a better world. And this week, our guest, once again, he was on last season, is Alex Easdale, who is the executive director of the Southeast Climate and Energy Network. And Alex I'm glad to see you once again. Doing well?
I'm doing great, my friend. How you doing, Reverend?
I'm doing great too. A little overworked, but that always beats the alternative of not having any work to do at all, right? I always say that to people. Better to have a lot of work than to be unemployed, right?
Yeah. It's a whirlwind here, and I think for a lot of people, this year for some reason has been even busier than last year. But it's kind of hard to believe we're already in September. To be honest with you, it's flown by, and but yeah, we're doing the good work though. We're doing some good work and getting some things done.
Yes, absolutely. And you and others out there may have felt like I did initially when the pandemic began. I was wondering, how we're going to get our work done. I actually thought we might be doing less work, but instead, oh my God, we're doing so much more. And I don't know how many Zoom calls there are going on in the world right now, but boy, it might be more than people. But but for those that don't know you, Alex, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself, how you came to do the work that you're doing now, and then from there we'll talk about Southeast Climate and Energy Network.
Absolutely, my friend. So I am Alexander Easdale. I'm the executive director of the Southeast Climate and Energy Network. I also own a consulting firm called Forging Alliances. And the reason I say that actually is because, and I'll get into SAN in a minute, but it's the reason why we're sitting here today. This was initially a contract through my consulting firm 5.5 years ago. So I am from Argentina. I was actually born and raised there. Argentina is a big country, the size of actually almost as big in terms of territory as India. Of course, not even close to the population, so about 50 million people there. But a third of the country is concentrated around the city of Buenos Aires, which has a population of, about 15, 16 million people in the metropolitan area. I am not from there. I'm from up north. The equivalent of the South in this country is the north of my country of origin. Very rural area. My father worked in the sugar industry. They still do, one of the biggest sugar mills in Argentina is up north. And he made his life working there, and then we migrated to this country. My mom is actually American, but grew up in Argentina. We migrated here when I was 10. And, and I managed to maintain a very strong connection with my country of origin, even though I consider myself a very proud American. I am Argentinian American, and I've gone back through the years, and I have a very big family over there that's very close knit. So there's nothing like going back to my home country. So any case, so I grew up here, went to school here, grad school here, graduated with a master's degree at Florida International University. I don't want to tell you how long ago it was, but it was a minute ago. And studied international relations. So made friends with a professor there who's pretty well connected. And at the time I said, I want to go ahead and learn about international relations and what it's really like. So he hooked me up with a contact at the Argentina consulate. And my career started there. I worked in the commercial section of the Argentina consulate in Miami. Eventually moved into a free trade area of the Americas negotiations. I wasn't really a negotiator. I was very young and starting out. I would support the negotiators that would come. Eventually got a job with a secretariat for the free trade area of the Americas. That took me to the country of Panama, where I lived for 2 years. Actually started dating a girl who worked there as well, who's now my wife, still with me. And, she's from Trinidad. And we started a family, and I'm still in love with that woman. But we started a family, lived in Mexico for a little bit. Our oldest son was actually born there. He was born very premature. When I was 30, he's 18 now. So that gives you an idea of how old I am. And yeah, so, my career started there, but then eventually came back over here and started working in the nonprofit sector. I worked with an organization called Hispanics in Philanthropy. And that's where I learned about fundraising and about program development and about just a completely different field. And really that fit me and my personality a lot better than I think trade negotiations or any of that sort of thing did. Working on social justice issues and on just issues and moving into the civil society side of things has been very beneficial for me. I also have worked at a university. I worked in higher education. I'm still a professor. In fact, I'm teaching a class after this interview in Miami. And the university that I work with is called Ana G. Mendez. It's a Puerto Rican university system. It's very big. And they have campuses here in the United States as well. So I used to be the number two, sub-director, if you will, or deputy director of a campus here in Miami for several years before I launched my own business in 2014. And then in 2016, I got the contract with the U.S. Climate Action Network to run this project, which at the time was a little bit in limbo. I'm talking about the Southeast Climate and Energy Network, or SEN, and came in and, you were there, Reverend, you were there before me, but, as a very active participant in this network. But it was really, I came in pretty green, no pun intended, into this movement. I'm not a climate scientist. I know my stuff about, environmental issues and what have you, but I'm definitely not a scientist. I came at this from a different perspective, and I think have brought something to the movement. And one thing that I think has been very beneficial for me in a leadership position is to surround myself around folks like yourself and many others who were initially a steering committee for SEN and now are part of the board of directors. And you all have been just unbelievable folks to co-create with. And our network has grown to over 70 member organizations. So I've been involved with SEN as a consultant and now as executive director for the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years now. So going on 6 years or over 5 years that I've been involved in this project. And it's, you're gonna have to kick me out because I love what I'm doing. I love this work and I love the people that I work with. And I know we're all exhausted from Zoom, but let me tell you, I'm tired of Zoom, but I'm not tired of the people that I work with and we're on meetings with, and I haven't always had that experience. So that's a long answer, Reverend, but, just a little bit of my background. So I'll stop there for now.
Oh yes, great. And had a little bit of experience, went to Argentina once, back in the early 2000s. It was, I had and still have a consulting company, Woodberry and Associates. And so working with an Episcopalian church, we actually went and worked with a church in Buenos Aires, La Mission, and did some training for them on how to set up small scale businesses. It was a time of economic turmoil in Argentina, when there were a lot of sanctions and medicines and things weren't getting to the country. And then also Quilmes, which I'm sure you know where that is. We did some work with a very old church there, did some renovation work. That church goes back to the 1800s when it was constructed. So actually did a little bit of work in Argentina, and that kind of led the way, paved the way after 9/11 to us doing some international work. So tell us exactly what the mission is of SEN How is it organized, composed, and what are some of the primary projects or programs that both the members of the organization and the network itself is involved in?
Right. So our mission with SEN is to confront the climate crisis by creating strategic alignment, growing capacity, and building power among member organizations and their communities in the southeastern U.S. And that's our mission. And it's a revised mission, so it's fairly new, which is really cool because we've gone through, this is like our third mission statement now. So it's kind of evolving along with the network. And our vision, which I'm absolutely in love with, is that we envision the southeastern U.S. as a leading region for just, equitable, and inclusive solutions to the climate crisis. And I want to underscore there as a leading region, okay? We need to change the narrative, and we have, I think, in this network, have done a good job of shifting the narrative a little bit about what the South is and what it isn't. And I think, the South has gotten a bad rap for a long time, justifiably so, in many respects. But this is a very dynamic region, and I'm going to get into that a little bit as well, because if I'm going to live in this country, there's nowhere else I want to live than the Southeast U.S. I'd love this region, the people there, and the communities there, and I mean, with all my heart. So, SEN is a network we're across 11 states in the Southeast, and we are in the process of beginning or exploring establishing a footprint in Puerto Rico, and maybe even the U.S. Virgin Islands, which are territories, if you will, of the United States and the Caribbean. And it makes sense, to look at that. But we have been in the southeastern U.S. since 2008. This was launched as a project, and Reverend, I think you were there. I wasn't. But a group within the U.S. Climate Action Network is a network now of 175 organizations. They're national. They're a node, if you will, of Climate Action Network International. So there's U.S. CANs, or CANs, if you will, in different countries of the world. And this, SEN, was launched as a project in result of the Waxman-Markey bill in 2008, which I believe passed the Senate but did not pass in the House. So it never became law. But as a result of that, some big green organizations, big environmental groups, and some strong regional groups and others decided that we need to have some kind of a mini network or some kind of coordination in the Southeast. So some of the initial groups were your Sierra Clubs and Environmental Defense Fund and RDC. And then you have Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, which is based out of Atlanta. I believe Southern Environmental Law Center is another group that was involved. I think Appalachian Voices was also a pretty early member. I believe you were there, Rev, early on. And so it became a network within a network, but it was an informal network, and it was a couple of listservs, and it was staffed by a person. So the initial person was somebody named Kellen Garrison, who I've never met. I've spoken to her before, though, and apparently she did a great job. And we got to give her props because she got this project really underway, along with all these organizations. And then she was replaced a few years later by a good friend of ours, Rudy Navarra, who currently works in philanthropy. He works with Emerson Collective. He used to work with Solutions Project. In fact, it was when he was transitioning into Solutions Project that Rudy reached out to me and several other people, about this opportunity, because his full-time job was being transitioned into a consultancy. So for me at the time, not even 2 years into my own consulting firm, this was a very attractive project, and it was a cause that I completely support. So I interviewed, and I got hired for a 6-month contract. That's all I had. And with a new executive director for USCAN at the time, Kaya Chatterjee. And she's taken USCAN in a wonderful direction as well. But she'd been there for about a year. I was brand new, and it was really interesting how SEN could have just dissipated and not existed. It was one of those moments where SEN was really focused around the Clean Power Plan that President Obama and others were pushing, but it got stayed at the Supreme Court. 2016 was an election year. He had set up this infrastructure. We had state leads in the different states talking about the Clean Power Plan, and I came in and I'm like, well, we have this call and people don't have anything to report on because it stayed at the Supreme Court. So one smart decision that was made was that we took that call and converted it to a call to have send member organizations talk about their work. So I remember Appalachian Voices being a group that came in and talked about their PACE program, right? We had other folks like Holmes Hummel come in, from Clean Energy Works, talk about their work. You came in, Reverend, talked about some of the amazing work you do in South Carolina and nationally. And it became a very interesting call. Then at the end of, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit here, but at the end of 2016, we did a survey for the entire network. And under Kay's guidance and leadership, the decision was made that this is going to be a member-led network. What that means is that this is not me or a group of us just making decisions. We have our network lead us and tell us where we need to go. So we surveyed, and one of the main things that came out of that survey was we established two working groups. One called the Fresh Energy Working Group, which deals with environmental, renewable energy efficiency issues, energy democracy. And then another group was the Environmental Justice Working Group. And SEN started to really get into that space, the climate and environmental justice space, where to my understanding, SEN had not really played a major role in the past. So obviously that brought into the fold many, many, many important leaders like yourself and others, and also the narrative and the richness of the conversation. You can't talk about environmentalism without talking about environmental justice. And the social justice elements and the intersectionality with other things like health and immigration and other issues, right? So in any case, so we started to evolve as a network. Long story short, created a steering committee, started convening regularly. And in 2018, we decided, and I'll never forget this, and I say this often, to become an independent network with the blessing of the US CAN. And you told me, and maybe, I don't know if you remember or not, but you said, you need to stay on as executive director. And I was thinking, I'm like, well, but I have a full-time consulting firm and I love this project. And I was thinking maybe I could stay on as a board or continue to be a consultant. And then I thought about it and I'm like, you know what? I think he's right. And I had a timeline in my head of maybe 2 years, and again, 2 years, my butt, because it's been almost 3 years and I love this. I love this job, as challenging as it is, we've been able to build a team. We're expanding our board. We have an amazing board of directors. So in any case, so I can talk a little bit more about the work since then, but I'll stop there because again, that's a pretty long answer.
Okay. Yeah, and you mentioned in the beginning the image of the South, and that's a false narrative that, has been put out by people who've been exploiting the South, through slavery, etc. I often point out to people the words of W.E.B. Du Bois, who said, as the South goes, the nation goes. And if it were not for General Greene during the American Revolutionary War deciding to go with the Americans and George Washington rather than the British, the war might have turned out differently, especially since South Carolina was the richest colony at that time, and Charleston was a major port out of those 13 colonies. And then we have so many other things that have happened. The first newly freed slaves who were elected to Congress and as governors and state legislators, that happened in the South. The Civil Rights Movement. And so Southern Organizing Committee in the late 80s and early 90s that helped to blaze the path forward for both climate and environmental justice. So always try to talk to people about, countering the negative image of the South. It's a place with a lot of exploitation and pollution, but a lot of what America is today is because what has happened in the South. And so with the work of SEN and its member organizations, once again, we see that as the South goes, the nation is going. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about a little more around programs with SEN is we're seeing the huge impacts that are happening now across the country, but particularly in the South, that is experiencing more climate impacts than any other part of the country. And so we look at, Now, pretty much every day there's a tornado, there's torrential rains, there's flooding, there's wildfires, there's droughts, you know. And so looking at what's going on, and as you described it, the climate crisis, what is Sen looking at in terms of how do we increase our involvement in our activities as we look across the nation and see that more and more people are being impacted by the climate crisis, and there's a greater and greater need for us to organize people, and Sen has a a really good opportunity to do that with this member organization placed strategically throughout the South. So just wanted to get a bit of your vision of what's going on with Sen when it comes to us dealing with the escalating climate crisis and its impacts.
Yeah, well, we just had Hurricane Ida tear through Louisiana, Mississippi, um, and then make it all the way up to the Northeast and do what it did. I mean, when did that used to happen? Did you see the images on TV? In the subway and trucks in the highway, like the water up to almost the top of the truck.
Mm-hmm.
Many people died. Tremendous property damage. This is a new normal. The fires. It's these things used to happen, but they didn't used to happen at this scale. And I think that's what people need to really understand. Let's not overcomplicate this. We've always had hurricanes, but man, if a hurricane hits the Gulf, I start to pray, because even if it's a Category 1, let's not forget Katrina was a Category 1, huh? That hit South Florida, where I live, and then it wasn't a major storm. It was Category 1 is strong, but it was, not too bad, if you will. Then it went up to the Gulf, and then it did what it did. And this one, the same thing. It was a Category 1. 2 days later, it's a Category 4. And it's because the ocean waters are warm. They're warmer. They're hotter. So the conditions, we've created the conditions for all this to happen. So we're not talking about, and internationally, we're talking about keeping warming to no more than 2% Celsius, or ideally 1.5% Celsius. Like, well, where we are now, it's pretty terrifying. I mean, so the context here is that we're a regional network, but this is a global problem. It's a global crisis that is happening now. It's not going to happen in the future. It's already happening, and we're seeing it every year. The last 16 of the last 17 years have been the hottest on record. I mean, that's just statistically, that's just not a coincidence. Let's get a clue here, guys. So I think one thing that we're talking about and thinking about with Sen is, one, consolidate our network by strengthening our presence in states where we're a regional network, right? So let's stay true to that and strengthen our presence in states like Louisiana, where we have some great members, but we could use more. Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, right? North and South Carolina are 2 states, for example, that have very strong membership and active membership. Virginia, we could strengthen our membership, but do it in a way where, as we're 71 formal members now. 2 years ago, we started with, I think it was 29 formal. So we've grown in 2 years, 2.5 years. That's what, 200 something percent increase. However, we're not out there trying to bring every organization to come into our system, right? We're growing this thing brick by brick smartly and bringing the right member organizations on board. That's very, very important. This isn't sales for us. This is really about us building a network, doing it thoughtfully, understanding that some things take time, understanding that the trust building process takes time. And I think we understand that better in the South than in other areas. The South is real. Again, a very positive attribute that I'm attracted to is that, you pretty know where you stand with people in the South for the most part. And I kind of like that. So any case, as far as programming, we have the Southern Communities for a Green New Deal. And go to our website, scen-us.org, And you can see there we have asset mapping, we have our Southern Communities for Green New Deal, which is a policy platform that was developed by leveraging our working groups. So we didn't create a new thing to do this. We leverage our working groups and different networks. And by the way, New Alpha CDC is an anchor organization along with Dogwood Alliance, GASP, and the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. 5 anchor organizations. We leveraged our collective networks. It wasn't just a SEND network. And Communities of Faith, by the way, really stepped up to the plate. And I say that because after we created this document, which was developed, it's a 40-something page document that covers different issue areas like, oh God, why am I blanking? Democracy, right? Economy and jobs, forest, land, right? Air, what have you, energy, obviously, right? So, and we had breakout conversations, and this document was developed collectively from a grassroots up process, which is pretty unique. Usually it's a group of people kind of drafting something and then having to trickle down. This is the opposite, right? So this document is a policy platform, and it's a living document that may change with time, right? Or it may be edited or amended, if you will, as context changes, right? But it's a pretty radical document in the sense that, it calls for some real things, for some solutions. So I recommend that you look into this, or if for your listeners to go to our website and look it up, because it's a really neat document. And it was signed on by 171 organizations within like the first week. First, I think it was 10 days. And many of those are faith-based organizations, and many of those are not SEND members. And then not every SEND member signed on, because again, we're not a coalition, we're a network. So there's diversity of opinion when it comes to different issues from different organizations. And that's totally fine, because we're a network, and this is a space for us to have conversations and to have disagreements and to learn from each other, right? So that's been our signature program right now, but we also have working groups that meet monthly. We also have a faith-based working group along with our environmental justice and fresh working group. And we also have an asset mapping initiative where we are we've developed an asset map of our network in the Southeast. And we've done this in conjunction and with the support of USCAN. And what's interesting about the asset map is we have organizational strengths and that's weaknesses, if you will, or areas of opportunity for organizations. So for example, let's say New Alpha CDC and organizational strength might be community organizing, right? And an area of opportunity might be, I don't know, fill in the blank. Let's say it's communications. I'm just throwing that out there. Well, guess what? We have organizations that have expertise and resources in relation to communication, so they can link up with you and give you some support instead of you going out there and paying for that. You follow me? So, so there's a capacity building component, and from there we can build out trainings and workshops and raise money for this and pay actual trainers to make that available. And we've done some of that stuff. You, in fact, gave an amazing community organizing training at your church. The last time we actually met in person as a network was in 2019 in Florence. And I'll never forget just how many years, I don't want to say how many, but many years of community organizing experience, Rep, since you were a teenager. I mean, you just can't buy that at the corner store. I mean, that's very valuable stuff. And our network has access to things like that, right? So the asset mapping is helping us with that, but at the same time, we're designing a power mapping element to where, let's say you and other organizations are fighting a pipeline, right? Developing like you just did and won, right? And maybe with Southern Environmental Law Center and some grassroots organizations and whatever, right? And maybe there's other groups within our network that are not familiar or aware of what's happening, that they can come in now and contribute to that, or learn, or now there's a fight happening in Arkansas, right? And they can go ahead and learn from what you've done over there. That's the idea of our network. So in real time, have a streamlined process to where we can support each other in a regional and eventually even national level very quick, because those things are important. And we've done some things. Our members have done some things. We have enough victories to know what works, but also our opponents, if you will, the fossil fuel industry, if you will, they also pivot and they also learn, right? So any case, that's just a quick snapshot of some of our programs, where we're headed. We're growing. We have a staff now of, I believe it's 5, and we have a part-time person that helps me with fundraising. And we're going to grow a little more, and then kind of like just ease up on the staff if you will. We'll be pretty well staffed up, and then just really just focus on just doing the work and staying mission focused, and not just chasing grants to do additional work, but really just staying within our lane and building it out from there.
Yes, because and that's all very important, because we're at a very unique time and place. We've gone as a country and as a world from a place where people were questioning if climate change was even real. I remember a congressman one time in Washington standing up with a snowball in his hand, saying if global warming is real, then how come it's snowing outside? Which was pretty ridiculous and not science-based. But we're at a point now where it's really hard for people to say that climate change is not real. There's still a debate about whether or not it's man-made. And at that point, I tell people, look, whether you want to accept that it's man-made or not, we need to do some things about it, which puts us, with some amazing opportunities now that people are realizing that, we can no longer deny that something is going on with the climate and the weather. And pieces like Southern Communities for a Green New Deal provides a good platform for organizing people around in communities, educating them a little more, and then having them talk with the policymakers, their elected officials in Congress, in the state legislature, even on the local level. I mean, we actually shared the Southern Communities for a Green New Deal document along with President Biden's executive order and some other things. And that was enough to convince our city council to start a green sustainability commission, and now looking to see how they could be trained to do some things to help with the climate impact. And we have a couple of other cities that are looking at it. So, doing that work, having the member organizations who are down on the ground in the communities, working on the state level, I just feel this is a tremendous opportunity to organize and educate people, because you can't keep looking at wildfires every day on the nightly news, or looking at the impacts from Hurricane Ida, and not just in Louisiana, but all the way up to New York and the New England states, and not say that something is not going to. There's something that's not going on. But let's segue to another question. So, how has the pandemic affected the work of SEN? Because it's affected everything in America. I mean, we just came to a decision that for the second year, we're probably not going to have a person-to-person creating a Climate for Change conference, which, is our biggest conference that brings together people from across the country, is going to be virtual. So how has, the pandemic impacted the work of the network in general, and maybe some specific organizations?
Well, it's been a challenge. But the one thing is that we've traveled very little. The in-person meetings, they ramped up a little bit this year, but now we're kind of cutting it back again. I did start to travel again. We just had a board retreat in person. But now, we just canceled our, the Creating Climate for Change conference, which I've happily participated and presented at. It's a staple, and I miss going there. And in fact, we had our convening was going to happen in Jackson, Mississippi. And we had bought tickets, myself and a couple of my staff, or our team, to go directly from Jackson to Florence so that we could participate in that. So we had to cancel all of it, and we made the decision to go virtual again. So SEN Meets Virtually has convened its network since I've been around. We established a practice doing it twice a year, and we call it the SEN convening and not the SEN conference or the SEN meeting. It's a convening because it really brings people together, and that's been part of the magic sauce, if you will, has been those meetings where we got to know each other. And people sometimes that ideologically are, not completely in agreement, right? But we built trust and conversations and, camaraderie, and it's really enhanced our network. And I think I'm happy we did that because part of the return on investment has been that we've been able to continue with our work pretty seamlessly, transitioning to Zoom, if you will, or Google Hangouts, right? I was thinking, it's like, so how did I work before? And I remember it was a lot of conference calls, right? So this is basically just a modified version of conference calls. So what's happened is that I think there's been a shift in the boundaries that's not necessarily a positive impact of working from home, if you will, in the sense that people are working longer hours. The convenience of this has become almost like you don't have the boundary where you go to an office and then you come home and then you're done with work, right? Now it's like, I'm guilty of it sometimes. 8 o'clock I'm on a call sometimes. 9 p.m. the other night I was in a board meeting at 9 p.m. It's like, dude, it's like we need to stop doing that. And also, the Zoom hour calls. Do we need a full hour? Can we make it in 30 minutes, right? Is it okay if once in a while we just do a quick phone call? One thing that I learned from you, Rev, is I remember you would call me directly. You wouldn't schedule a call. You just call me, right? So I've developed this habit of going for a bike ride at around 6, 7 p.m. And sometimes I'll call board members and I'll call key stakeholders who are busy, right? Because I figure, and these conversations sometimes last 5 minutes, right? But they're so productive. You see what I'm saying? Instead of scheduling this whole meeting and, so I think it's helped us be very productive. I think we have a team that's flexible and pretty young too. So they've adapted very quickly. It's been a hindrance in the sense that we're not meeting in person, and that's necessary sometimes. It's very important to look somebody in the eye and see body language and have a meal together and break bread together, which we just did, right? I came out of that extremely motivated and excited about the future in a way that I haven't been in a while, just because I got to see the leaders of our network, all of us getting together and co-creating a little bit and having some conversations and some disagreements and then some agreements and a lot of action steps, right? As we're finalizing a strategic plan for the next 3 years. So I'll say one more thing about COVID. It has helped with the bottom line, because if you don't travel so much, you don't spend as much. When you travel, you spend money. So in that regard, I think it's been a pretty positive thing.
Yeah. So that I know for us, it has been because we're such a community-based organization, and it changed our work so that. When we used to have 6 what we call community forums a year, and we shifted to having to meet with people in parked cars with a microphone and a speaker, and instead of disseminating material, handing out flyers and stuff to folks, having to put them in door hangers. Where we can hang stuff on doors in the community and sometimes knock on the door and step back and talk with folks. And it just has been interesting in how some of, I'm sure, other SEN member organizations have had to shift the way that they do the work. And some good points, some things like, we reached the conclusion that the whole concept of food deserts and food swamps are a false narrative. That during the pandemic, people were giving out produce and food from shopping plazas, from churches, from community centers, from parking lots, in communities where, where we had this false narrative that if some corporation didn't come along and build a supermarket, people were just doomed to having to consume food that is not heavenly, no, absolutely not, heavily, heavily laden with salt and sugar. And so you mentioned the new normal. So out of adversity comes opportunities. And so maybe a good thing might be is for some uh, member organizations is to talk about how the work has shifted and how there's new perspectives now that have taken place. Because now we know that in some places people are doing more like community gardens, and they're doing more, more like farmers market type endeavors in communities. So, yeah, so it has shifted and changed the way that we do our work dramatically. And you mentioned Puerto Rico. You mentioned the U.S. Virgin Islands, which a lot of people don't realize that while the United States doesn't call them colonies, they are pretty much what colonies used to be, predominantly held by European countries. And you talked about a whole shift of looking at those countries and outside of the continental US and how what's happening in the southern United States is connected internationally. And again, another event we've had to postpone the last couple of years is our Global South Summit that we had 6 of them, and we would have them at the Church Center for the United Nations, right across the street from the United Nations in New York City. And we started that because, like I said, well, we did, so it's been about 8 years now because we're going to miss 2 years. But we started that because we saw the similarities that were going on in what we call the global South when it comes to not only polluters, but also the impacts that, the flooding and the same impacts that we're seeing in the United States of America are happening around the world, but particularly in those places close to and below the equator, where the planet is, in general, is heating up. It's heating up faster in those areas that are closer to the equator and further south. So we'll talk a little bit about, the inclusiveness, whether it's going to be with member organizations or working with in partnership with other organizations or countries in the Southern Hemisphere. You mentioned you mentioned Climate Action Network International, and I know there's also some interest in COP 26 scheduled for Glasgow, Scotland, though it looks like that might be postponed as well. But how about time what Sen is doing in the South, what's happening in the Southern US to what's happening in territories otherwise known as colonies like Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the alignment or the connections between what's going on in the Southern U.S. and what's going on in the global South.
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think that's something that we are, I don't want to say grappling with, but we're definitely thinking about seriously. And again, so the challenge here is that we need to move fast because the house is on fire. It's not like we can just sit here and say, well, in 10 years, no, the house is on fire now. So you're basically trying to change the tires in a moving truck or a moving bus, if you will. At the same time, my approach is I don't want to play a long game, but definitely I want to just play a short game, So we have to consolidate our network in the Southeast. We are a Southeastern network. I just want to emphasize that. It's very, very important that we don't forget or lose sight of who we are At the same time, there's a lot we can offer other parts of this country, other parts of the world, and vice versa. There's a lot that we can learn from each other. And I think, so working, and I personally have experience, and so do you and others in international spaces. So that's very valuable to have had that experience. And it's interesting and important to hear those conversations at that level, right? And see how you can contribute and what you can take out of it as well. So there might be a lot that we can learn from, I don't know, organizations and farmers in Uganda, if you will, right? And connect them with folks in Alabama, right? Haven't brought up the rural space, but we are also working in that space, and we're going to do some things there with some support from NOAA. We have a project coming up in some very rural communities in North Florida, Southern Georgia, and Alabama. We're going to do an assessment that's going to lead to a white paper, and we're going to do some education on what climate change is in these communities, right? In a way that's culturally competent, if you will, right? So the connection with the rest of the world, there's a lot of similarities between the U.S. South and some parts of the so-called global South, which is most of the world, really, the developing world, if you will, in that there's some structural issues, the disparity between the rich and the poor all over this country. And there's been an increase in the disparity between the top earners and the most wealthy, and the rest, especially the poor, have gone down and they've come up more, right? So that's a structural problem. And what happens in that situation is you have the middle class is burdened, and the middle class, again, that's a very loose term, because middle class, you can be kind of lower middle class to upper middle class or whatever, however they call it. There's a huge difference sometimes, in terms of income, but there are some structural similarities between what happens in the U.S. South and in countries in the developing world, let's call it, or the global South. So I think that a lot can be learned from there. A lot can be gleaned from there. Also, the immigration issue is something I'm keeping a very close eye on. Climate migration and gentrification. I'm very interested in watching climate migration. How many people, I'm not talking about just folks who are poor, right? Which is the migration patterns have been from poor countries to richer countries, right? I'm thinking about, what about somebody, the middle class, upper middle class that lives in California? How many more of these dry seasons and this fire season the last half the year are they going to really put up with? How many times do you lose everything before you say, you know what, I need to leave, And what about the extreme heat that we face down here? How many, right now, Texas and Florida are the two states that have the most inward migration, the fastest growing states in the country. And in fact, they rank second and third in terms of population, right? Florida used to be fifth a few years ago. They're third now. Okay, we're third here. Eventually, though, people are going to migrate more north because it's too hot, right? So I think, and some people are going to get the heck out of the United States and go to places like Panama, for example, or Costa Rica, right? And are these countries ready for this immigration? You see? So I think there's a lot of connection, a lot of things that we need to learn from each other, and a lot of things that are contextually relevant, that it would be a huge miss for us to not talk to and deal with and partner with other organizations and groups in other countries of the world.
Absolutely. And as you said, there are things that folks in the global South can learn from us in the U.S., and we can learn from them. You brought to remembrance for me us being in Tanzania and seeing how they had these containers, blue containers, where they would check the water, purify water, and have water stations set up where people would come with containers and collect water, clean drinking water to take back home. Or the Catholic school we visited that used human waste to create methane gas, to create gas, and they cooked with the gas. And a lot of what they cooked was food from the garden that they had, and they used the remnants from burning the human waste. They used the remnants from that, mixed it with soil, and used that as fertilizers for the garden. And so they had this self-enclosed, self-sustaining system Or I also remember being in Sierra Leone and Liberia, where they charge phones not by using electricity on the grid, but they had batteries, like car batteries, little sailboat batteries, connected to solar panels. And people would stand in line and pay $1, and they were charging their phones that way, and they were creating jobs and businesses, and not doing what we're doing, because every time we charge our phone, in a lot of cases, we're just utilizing more coal, more fossil fuels, which is just adding more carbon to the atmosphere, and still contributing to the climate impacts. And then also, great thing to look at is the whole immigration issue and how the climate is impacting that. And I agree with you. I said that we're going to find ourselves in a place with sea level rise and inland flooding and extreme heat and wildfires, where we're going to see people moving away from the coast and moving away from the south, moving northward. And what is that going to mean as we get these huge population shifts? And there will be sometime soon a paper coming out from Tuskegee University that we worked on with Agricultural Missions Incorporated. And the paper actually looks at racism, globalism, like NAFTA and like the NAFTA agreement, racism, globalism, climate change, and immigration. So I'm really excited that we can get to share that with the public, but the agreement that we have, it has to first be published by Tuskegee University, but I think we're probably a few weeks, maybe a month or so, and we'll be able to share that with the network. And some of the things you're talking about and thinking about, hopefully that may be something that can help us in our future work as we see more and more migration. Actually, now a lot of the growth that's going on in Texas is because they have a lot of people leaving California, moving to Texas. A lot of people, because of the cost of living, because of the drought, because of the wildfires, as you have said. So we're starting to draw to a close, but as we started off talking, the 71 organizations in the 11 states that are working on climate and energy issues is really important. I want to encourage our listeners to go to the Southeast Climate and Energy Network website and look at the Southern Communities for a Green New Deal, and feel free to share that with other organizations and elected officials, and talk about some of the policy changes that we need to make in order to deal with the impacts of climate change. Alex, one of the things that we say here, and we have these posters that we sometimes put out on as yard signs, or take them to actions that we have, and you've seen it. It's a flooded community with fish, and way in the background you see an ark like Noah had, and we have written on there the words, Noah had a plan, what's yours? And as some of our listeners are tackling with the impacts of Hurricane Ida, flooding, wildfires, etc., in the South, in New York subway, ask your elected officials, ask your community organizations, ask your faith leaders, what's our plan to deal with the increasing impacts of climate change, the climate crisis, not even climate change, it has turned into a crisis. And so, Alex, why don't you share with our viewers and our listeners how they can get in touch with you and Southeast Climate Energy Network, so that they can find out about the amazing work that's being done and see some ways that they could support the work or become involved in the work.
Absolutely. And let me just say one thing very quickly that's actually available to anyone, because one of the things that we need to do a better job of is reaching out to the public and talking to different people who are not part of our movement, if you will. That's very, very crucially important. And a lot of people are ready for that conversation and want to be activated and want to do something. We have a podcast actually called the Climate Justice Y'all Podcast. And you can download this podcast from Apple, from anywhere. Climate Justice Y'all. That's a Y, little apostrophe, all. So y'all. And it's actually
the way they say it in Argentina, right?
Yeah. Yeah, man. I do want to see that publication you mentioned. I'm excited to look forward to reading that. And the way you can get a hold of me is you can email me at Alex at sen, SCEN, sen-us.org. So Alex at sen-us.org. And another way you can definitely get a hold of me is email Sophia, again, the name Sophia, at sen-us.org. She'll probably reply quicker than I will, to be honest. But, you can email Sophia and copy me. Either way, we'll get back to you. And go to the website. Check it out. There's a lot of valuable information. Our membership list is there. You mentioned agricultural missions. They're also a SEN member. Dr. Sherrod, one of my favorites. Look at our member list and learn more about our work. And let us know how we can help and we can collaborate together.
Okay, yes. So don't forget to check that out, SEN, Southeast Climate and Energy Network. And as always, Alex, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. We always learn so much from one another and bounce things off each other. And we hope that you, our audiences, also, you've also been educated and encouraged and excited to answer the call to let's take action. Let's advocate, let's work hard so that our communities can move from surviving to thriving as we deal with the impacts of the climate crisis, create energy democracy, and a just transition that brings about jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities for all. So thank you once again, Alex, and until next week, we'll be waiting to see you on the call.
From all the places and all the races, on and on now, put out beats.